Psychotechnologies Live! Welcome to a really cool episode of Psychotechnologies Live. We've got a special guest on, Damiano.
Oh, we lost him. Okay. Damiano Ramazzotti.
Yes.
We're gonna
Thanks for having me.
We asked him if we could call him a failed entrepreneur, a failed integralist, and I don't know what else you failed
at. So far, those are the two things I'm really making an effort at failing consistently on.
Good, great, amazing. Let me just let Daniel back in here 1 second.
I think just trying to pronounce my name just locked him off.
His name is.
Okay, I'll let you pronounce your name. How do you pronounce your name? I should have asked you before.
Damiano Ramazzotti.
Damiano
Ramazzotti.
Yes.
Okay, start again. We got a very special, very cool episode this week with with
we lost him. We lost Daniel.
We start again.
Just think damn, and then the rest comes on its own.
Okay, we're gonna cut this one when we put it up. Okay, so we got a very special episode this week with Damiano, who is a failed entrepreneur, failed integralist, which is awesome. We haven't seen a lot of entrepreneurs and like psychotechnologists in this space yet. I think you're the first one on our podcast aside from I guess
you were gonna say you haven't seen a lot of failures on podcasts.
We haven't seen a lot of people admit failure. I think a lot of people like to pretend. This is like, we live in like the society where everyone's got to pretend that they're always on top of the game, and it's like California attitude.
We have the like highlight real life, right? Everyone's on Instagram going like, look how great I am, look how many parties I go to, and no one's like, look how many nights I spent at home alone doing nothing, look how lame I am.
Yeah. So that's awesome that you're able to like that's how you introduce yourself to us like earlier before we were getting to know each other. And like immediately, like I didn't know you, but immediately I'm like, I like this guy. Trying to move through life, failing at everything, but like keeping on going. And I think that's like really it really shows like a deeper character or something beneath that.
Right, so I want to start with like, how did you get into integral theory? Because everyone's got like this origin story where they like crashed head first into it and they were like, oh, this is big.
So then the way I got into integral is because I was in another time of crisis, another time of failure, where basically I was suffering from very strong anxiety, chronic fatigue. I was basically unable to get out of home. Like I was just useless. And I got into a technique called rebirthing. It's sort of like holotropic breathing, breathwork, basically holotropic breathwork. And it's generally very new agey. But by some chance, in Italy, there is a group of people that do rebirthing using Ken Wilber as a model. So once I kind of got a sense that they were not nutcases, I thought, okay, let's give it a try. And so I discovered integral while I was doing quite intensely holotropic breathing or rebirthing. And it helped me sort of frame the experiences. It was super beneficial because I got to sort of being able to pretend that I was a normal person again after doing holotropic breathing. And then it sort of stayed with me. I was working on intercultural dialogue. So my job was to actually help people from different cultures talk to each other. So again, integral was useful. And then back to the failing entrepreneur part. In the past years, I've had a lot of challenges with my company. And I were at a point of complete crisis. And somehow in that point, integral came back and I tried to get back into it to sort of try and make sense of everything and figure everything out in the hope that figuring everything would solve all my problems. It didn't, but I understand integral a little bit better now because of that. So that's been my cycle of integral exploration.
That's so cool. Like, I love that you're like open with your failures, and you said you were going through depression and using the holotropic to like feel like a normal person, which I totally relate to that. Like when you're coming back online, back into society, and like you want to feel like a normal person, even though like I guess deep down you aren't. And then
I
like,
want to know more about this practice. Do you still do the holotropic breathwork?
Yeah.
On like a regular basis? Or?
Yeah, I would say it's been my main, like I've always done, meditation, different types of meditation, stuff like that. But I would say rebirthing has always been with me. I've lost count of how many sessions I've done. I went from, in some moments doing it like twice a day, which is it's a fairly intense experience. It generally lasts about like, an hour and a half, 2 hours, to maybe doing it once a week, once a month. Sometimes I do it just a little bit more lightly to get the intuitions going. So my coworkers are used to the fact that I'll just sort of silently start hyperventilating, or just like, and it's just normal for them. But it's definitely has stayed with me as a core practice. And I had done meditation before, so getting to it after already having done meditation was very useful. It's a little bit like getting to psychedelics with having a prior meditative experience. Rebirthing or holotropic breathing is not quite like psychedelics, but it is still very intense. And it's good if you need quick results and you're desperate enough to plow through the physical suffering that it brings, then it works.
Yeah, my knowledge of the history is that Stan Grof was working with mushrooms with psychedelics until they were illegal in America, and then he went and found holotropic breath work as his solution to how to still do the same things that he was doing with psychedelics without the illegal drug.
Yeah, precisely. So it's a perfect preparation for psychedelics. Right. If you want to sort of get to psychedelics with a little bit more, more calm and preparedness, that definitely helps.
That's interesting. I've never heard that one before, but like I have talked to people who want to do psychedelics, but they're scared and they don't know what's going to happen. And
yeah, the great thing about breathing is you can just stop for a bit and come back down to earth.
Yeah, the peculiar thing about holotropic breathing is that it comes with very strong physical sensations. So for example, one of the typical things that happens is that your hands will paralyze. And it's just like, it's a typical symptom of hyperventilation. And it's really hard, and you're sort of working against all your chronic tensions that you've built. The breathing is how we control our emotions. Plus you have all the oxygen, you feel sick, you want to stop. So that's why it's also very hard to learn on your own. Being in a seminar with a group of people with loud music, it actually helps you plow through. But then the experiences that it produces are, very cathartic. It can go anywhere from remembering a trauma that you had as a child, just relive it completely and sort of heal it in the process, to having purely transpersonal, typical transpersonal experiences. So anything from sort of witnessing, sort of disidentification, to subtle state, sort of dreamlike, very vivid visions, and all those things. And in doing that, having a map of what's going on is very helpful. And Integral is perfect in that sense.
Right. I was about to ask, how do you blend transpersonal psychology, which is Stan Grof's branch of psychology, with integral theory? How do you get them to like fit neatly together? And I think that was just the answer just then, that integral's the map.
Yeah, integral is the map. And I think just like, first of all, understanding the different states of consciousness, understanding, that there is not just this physical and mental realm, but that there is this realm of empty observation and sort of what to expect there. The second time I did it, I had the typical witnessing myself experience and realizing that I'm the observer and not the observed. And it was so great that I had that experience. I could tell it to the therapist and they would be like, yeah, that's super normal. This is what it is. This is what it does. You have these different parts of your brain, of your mind that do these different things. And then as you go further, the developmental aspect is useful when dealing with the allergies that you have for the world. You can sort of give a name to like, why am I annoyed at this type of people? They are red, for example, and I tend to identify with something else. That's something to solve there. It just, it helps gives a name to the things you encounter, even to the archetypes you encounter.
I actually really like using the word allergy to describe because often it's another type of people or another culture or another, like those damn kids on my lawn. It's like, oh yeah, this is like, it is an allergy, right? Because they're there and they're just annoying me or something. The same way that a dust might be an allergy causer, or like a pollen or a particular food.
Seriously, and I think that development is a lot like development always tends to come as a sort of allergy for the previous stage, what you were a minute ago. And so there is always this process of disowning what you were a minute ago. You know, the child who stops being a traditional religious
I'm
person,
not a baby
becomes
anymore.
a hardcore atheist. No, or he become a hardcore atheist and he just hates anybody who isn't an atheist, but he was that like a month ago, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's normal. It's normal. You need to sort of separate and then reown these pieces. And it just helps contextualize all that, I think.
Mm-hmm. I'm like,
and
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I think it also just this sense of the three bodies, like the physical, the subtle, and the causal. The beauty of rebirthing or holotropic breathing is that the first session I did, just the insight was, wow, I have a body. It was just that. So it's that first session was, I have a body. And the second session was, okay, let me reown what I'm projecting. Like I was surrounded by people and there was some that I just was naturally annoyed at. And I was breathing and breathing and breathing. And then I felt my sensations. And suddenly sort of the sensations that I projected on them came on my face.
Oh.
And so it was just like, that guy was annoying. I felt my sensation about the guy, and suddenly I was a really annoying troll. And I was looking at this troll, and I was looking at it, and then I was like, who the fuck is looking at this troll? Like, I can't be both. So I got to be the observer, and the troll disappears. And so those were really like, first session was body, and the second session was subtle, these identity states, and then observation, the causal. And so just being able to sort of neatly see your experience with such a simple linear map just makes it easier to keep going, essentially, and not get scared.
This is very interesting. So one way I work with people sometimes is talking about projections and reowning projections.
Yeah.
There's work from a guy named Kim Bardo, and he talks about sort of like reowning your, like letting go of introjects, so beliefs you have absorbed from other people and giving them back, and then reowning your projections on other people. But you had like the experiential version of like, oh, that's my projection.
It was literally just like taking a face, putting it on, and it was really. But the key to that was that the day before I had this deeply physical experience, because the mask wasn't some sort of ethereal thing. It was regained by actually taking physical sensations that felt outside and actually asking myself, okay, where is this emotion of that guy's an asshole? And that emotion is here. And if I feel it here, I don't feel it out there, then I'm forced to be the asshole. And if I'm forced to be the asshole, then I can witness it.
And work.
So there was a somatic component. There was a somatic component to the shadow work, and it was just like 2 sessions, and my mind was blown, because it was just like I had meditated for years, I had heard about this stuff, and in just 2 sessions, it was just like clear as day. And so it's just like you get hooked on it. Like that's why you kind of like psychedelics. You do your first experience, it's so mind blowing that you just want to keep getting that download of insight.
What's going on, Daniel?
Yeah, I'm just following this because it's interesting, like the way you're contextualizing it is I think different than what we're normally do. So you're using like the integrative model essentially, right? Can you tell us more about that? Can you explain it? And
Yeah.
So the crazy theories.
So the integral model is basically this attempt to build a very simple yet comprehensive map of everything. And by everything, you mean consciousness, but also the outer world and how it evolved through the centuries and stuff like that. And in doing this, Ken Wilber, who's one of the guys who really sort of formulated one version of this, he created a set of, let's call them coordinates, a set of variables. And then if you take any of those variables, you can sort of place anything, any expression in the universe can somehow be placed. They call it a cosmic address by using these addresses. It's a very figurative, it's not like a literal cosmic address. And so the lenses that they use, one of them is levels. Probably your followers are familiar with them, like the developmental stages but the thing that integral theory adds or really clarifies is that these levels actually exist in 4 areas of reality. Your subjective experience, subjective and individual experience, the subjective and collective experience of your culture, the subjective but objective aspects of like your brainwave and neural correlates. Like if you have an experience, there is actually something physical going on in your brain.
Gonna help out and throw this up. Yeah.
Yeah. And then on the psychology, top left, culture, bottom left, then neurophysiology, top right, and then the bottom right is systems, economy, the environment, all these different things. And it's a matrix of basically individual, collective, subjective, objective. And this is really useful because think about how much of our practice is trying to figure out what of you is you and what of you is just crap that you've osmotically sucked up from the system, or how much of your suffering is due to a psychological reason versus there's just not enough oxygen in your apartment, or you don't work out enough, your endorphins are not running, or how much, you can try and solve your crap as much as you like, but if you don't have a job, that's a tangible, real problem that is as tangible as the other ones. And so this is it's a very neat way, if you're trying to establish a practice on yourself, it allows you to say, okay, these are sort of 4 fundamental areas that I need to deal with. And if I'm not dealing with one of them, it's okay, but at least I should be aware that I'm doing that. So he has levels, quadrants. The levels develop across the quadrants. So you would have stages of socioeconomical system that develop, types of culture that develop, type of psychological levels that develop, and brainwave structures that develop. And they're all sort of intercorrelated. The other map is the states, so physical, subtle, causal, and non-dual, which are sort of like we experience those daily, like you're awake right now, right? So you have you're experiencing the physical world. But when you fall asleep, you're in what they call the subtle world, which is basically the world of subjectivity, of ideas, of thoughts, of emotions, symbols, but without the physical realm. And then you have dreamless sleep, where there's nothing. Now, that nothing is what they call the causal body, or the observer, which is an element of our consciousness that is actually always present in your daily life. There's always some guy, something observing what's going on in your consciousness, but it cannot observe itself. And so integral sort of says there is this observer. Within this observer, there's a world of ideas and emotions and feeling, which is the subtle realm. And then there's the physical realm. And if you wrap them all together and you're able to experience all together at once, you have the final super cool non-dual enlightenment that we're all hoping to get. And then there's other variables like types, which are personality types or gender. And then you have types, states,
levels, states, types,
quadrants. I think we have them all. And so this is just a good way to map your practice, to understand what's going on, to self-reflect when you're having an experience. Okay, is this my own experience, or is this my own emotion, or is this my mom's emotion, or the emotion of my culture in relation to something else? So it helps you sort of place these things in different ways, but it's also very useful in the world because it gives you a lens to read the world. When you're looking at a problem, you're saying, okay, is this a cultural problem, or is it a systemic problem, or is there an interplay between the two? So it's hard to really convey in a few sentences how useful it is, because it's literally a map of everything. So it's like, where could that be useful? Everywhere.
As long as you exist, it's useful.
Oh man, one time I was in a meetup and someone asked like, how do you use integral? And I was like, oh, like every day, like right now in the conversation. And I just sounded like a crazy person.
I know,
they were
I
like,
know.
you know, because to a reasonable scientist, like if it's everything or nothing, it's like, it's probably just nothing, you know. I'm probably delusional or something. But so quadrants, levels, lines, states, and types. I actually have this wild idea that there's two more that I want to add to that set. And I don't say this very often, because I don't get to like jam out with integral nerds very often. But I think the two more I would add is roles and phases. So roles are like
roles
and phases.
And phases.
Yeah.
Okay.
So roles are like, I'm your boss, right? I just like but it's like a mask that I wear, and there's like a structural relational. It's definitely more in the it's in the psychology side. It's not in the external world, but it's like I can wear a role, right? I'm your parent, I'm your boss, I'm your superior, I'm your holy leader, I'm your cult leader, you know, whatever. Any of these like, and of course I've named a lot of hierarchical roles, but there's also like I'm your friend, or like I'm your inspiration. Like I get to wear that role for you. And that like describes how we interact with each other. It describes some energetic properties of like projections and stuff. And the last one is phases. And that is like, you know, you'll have the childhood phase, your teenagerdom. Like there is a phenomena of being a teenager. There is like being a student is a phase. There is like, these are like movements, like grand movements. I feel very poetic when I'm like, you know, we move through life in this like big sweeping, like now I'm going traveling, like this is my traveling phase, right? But it speaks to something of a phenomena that is like a subtle object, right? Going through a phase. I was still me the whole time. I was still me when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, but there's some like definitely I was something when I was a teenager. Yeah. And I don't usually tell people this, but I like that there. And I think they're powerful.
The first one, it's like the interesting thing about the first one is what you're describing is like a temporary configuration of relational structure that doesn't define who you are. That is not the entirety of who you are, because integral tends to describe you as like the entirety of you is this combination of things. But what you're describing is this aspect of you in this situation with these people tends to express these other things that are probably emergent on that are not reducible to these other things.
Right. So think of like school teacher, right? Yeah. Imagine like I know a school teacher from when I was a student, right? And I looked at the teacher and I was like, that's my school teacher. And the school teacher had the properties of not having their own life, because I was like a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old and just being this school teacher person. And so from my perspective, there was no full humanity behind them. They were only wearing the role, right? But then imagine it from the other side. If I were the school teacher and there's a class full of like 20 or 30 little kids who like project on me that I am just the two-dimensional robot being that teaches you the mathematics or something, right? I don't have like depth or emotionality or complexity here. I'm just a school teacher, right? So there's a phenomena here with two sides to it that doesn't define, well, I mean, from the immature perspective, it defined my teacher, but from the like the teacher also sits in that role deliberately. Like they're not like trying to remind me they're a full human there. They're just trying to teach me math. And to the extent that I project on like the mathematical wisdom, they're just my school teacher, right? They don't have more than that, because I'm like a dumb little kid who doesn't understand the world.
Well, it sounds like you're describing like Maya. Like it sounds like something even deeper, like the veil of illusion.
Interesting.
You've almost described like the structure of how our perception of reality is limited by the informational constraint of that moment. So it's like it's quite deep in that sense.
Right. Well, it was, I mean,
And
maybe
then-
it was a naivety to me as a school student when I had those moments, but like, yeah, it's deep enough that, you know, I'm the boss or I'm the police officer and like, you need to do what I say. And everyone's like, oh, it's the police, we got to do what they say. Yeah.
And also objects have roles, meaning
Right.
that the glass, we interpret the glass for its function,
Right.
but it's an illusion to believe that it is a glass. A glass is just a label that we add onto it. So sounds like you're onto something. You need to add some like I think that if you can create like a subcategory of roles, then it's easier to market as a sub because each line has to have some things, you know, like the levels have the levels, the quadrants have the different quadrants.
Right.
So
We need to
come
add
up
something
with,
to the
like,
whole theory.
Yeah,
exactly.
well, I think we can throw in, we have already a couple ones. So we do the rescuer, victim, persecutor one. So
Right,
like
the
that's
drama
archetypal
triangle.
role.
Like the archetypal, yeah.
There's something called the drama triangle, which is like
Yeah.
started for stage work and then it grew into like actually a useful therapeutic technique. So those are roles as well, right?
Yeah,
Well,
right.
I mean, I guess they come from like archetypes, like Jungian psychology, which I don't think is well integrated into integral. But roles are basically just another word for archetypes.
I think the place that integral places Jungian psychology is in the lower left quadrant of the subjective collective, which sounds a lot like the collective unconscious. Because the idea there is that all your ideas or your values are not yours. They're inherited from a flow of collective information. And since this flow has developed through stages, the archetypes of each of those stages are sort of embedded in this psyche of the individual. So you'd had warrior cultures, but even though we're not a warrior cultures anymore, that their archetype still exists, both outside as an idea and inside as a persona that is at conflict with all my other personas, fighting for power and dominance as to what I do.
And I guess in relation with each other, which would be like that collective dimension.
Yeah.
And then also my guess is like there's this physical aspect, like with the teacher, it's like you have to raise your hand before you go to the bathroom. So it's like that physical level. And then you have the subtle level of, you know, the teacher saying, don't, you know, change your attitude. You know, you're giving me a bad attitude. Like, what does that mean? Like, can you point to it? Like, no, you can't, but it's still real, it's still there. And then I guess, you know, if you're mature enough, then you can get that observer stuff where you're like watching yourself play in these roles.
Yeah. And you can also recognize that there's another observer on the other side. And that is just sort of that oneness, that you-ness, that sense of togetherness comes from exactly the fact that we transcend these structures into something more shared.
Yeah, like the realization that we're all just people living our lives, you know, the world's a stage and every man's an actor. I guess is the observable.
One thing that maybe it's useful to say is, I think one of the interesting thing that integral clearly states is how much our internal conflicts are an expression of outer conflicts and vice versa. So if you have all these stages, you know, look at the culture war, and you have the Peterson and all these characters that are just like at each other's
Tate
throats.
just got arrested. So
exactly. Well, the truth is that sadly, we all have an Andrew Tate inside of us. We all have a Jordan Peterson inside of us. We all have these characters. Hopefully, we have also some other ones, and they're all vying for power. And so that same, you know, that conflict between should I exert my dominance or my compassion is something that we experience inside, but you also see it on Twitter playing out live on stage. And to your other point, Elliot, the allergies that we feel for the outside are just the same, the allergies that we feel for those parts inside. And then the broader socioeconomical conflict between classes and the techno-economical systems is itself an expression of these dominant structures and these guys who tend to have this mode of being, who get screwed out by these richer guys who tend to be and think in another way. And it's sort of very as outside, so inside. You know, they say as above, so below. here it's really as inside, so outside. And it gives you a map to really see that.
Yeah, in psychology, I think they would call this like projecting or transference, countertransference.
Yeah.
Where you're having some internal conflict and then that's being played out externally, or vice versa with the external stuff.
I mean, this is also like where I start getting scared. Like, I'm like, what do you mean outside so inside? Like, what do you mean inside so outside? Like, you mean like I'm like partially responsible for it, or like my experience of my internal where I'm battling myself is actually out there? And oh no, how? What am I? Oh no, maybe I should just never leave my room. That way, my internal conflicts will never get out into the world.
And that means that just the whole entire world will stay in its room. Just because
maybe.
Of you. No,
oh no, that's also bad. Oh no.
I think that if you read it from a Ken Wilber has a very Buddhist background. So I think that the best way to read how he intended this is in a non-dual sense. There is no clear boundary. Like we have a functional boundary between the inside and the outside, but there is no actual inherent fundamental boundary.
Right.
Like your words, like they're not your words. I'm speaking the same words. Whose words are they? Your alphabet. These ideas, the concept that we use, they don't belong to anyone. They're just floating around and our brains host them momentarily. So it's I think meditating on if you're interested in non-duality, integral theory is a very good meditation to grasp a little bit this sense that everything is this chain of cause and effect. It happens psychologically, neurologically, culturally, systemically. There is no clear boundary, and it's kind of all just a single mush, you know. And when you really see things like that, then they become really empty. That you get a little bit this Buddhist concept of emptiness, because what are you if you're just a mesh of processes of cause and effect that happen at all these different levels? Then if you want to take the more like kind of esoteric idea that the outside is actually an expression of the inside, that's also another there is also that line of thinking, but I can't prove that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still exploring that, and I think it's a really interesting psychological exploration, because I'm going to walk through the world and I'm going to argue with someone, or I'm going to find someone that I don't like. And we were just talking about projection, right? So so there's an opportunity there every time I find someone I don't like, is to find the part in me to make peace with. And that's like deeply spiritual personal work that everywhere I go, I can be doing and improving the world that I relate to. Which, I mean, ideally, I want to live in the world where I get along with everyone in some, or at least I enjoy the conflict if I do have conflict. Like, that's also okay. But it's got to be fun for me and for them too, right? And that's hopefully that's the better world as well. When I'm like, they're having fun, I'm having fun, even though we're like strongly opposed and arguing. Like, that seems like a pretty good world to be in.
Yeah, and the hope of integral, like I think the biggest failed expectation of integral is that integral level thinking is really like defined by a capacity to look at different people, see where they're at, and understand them based on where they're at. So, for example, if you talk about levels, Daniel, you were talking about this before, how also in business, in different situations, you want to get a sense of where people are in the spiral or other things to be able to better relate to them. The big expectation is that integral people were going to be the big peacemakers of the world. And it hasn't happened yet. Like we haven't been really able to show that we're better than anybody at discussing with other people.
I think it's happening slowly. Like I would be worried if it like if integral just came in like a whirlwind and like destroyed everything and we're like, we're integral now. This is how the world is. It's really not making friends with the world that you're about to invade and like manage and like peacekeeper. So if that happened, I'd be really worried. I'd be like, what's the shadow of that movement? But like they're like sneakily, like not necessarily in a bad way sneakily, but like gently like floating in and like occupying all of these roles and like slotting into different governments and like moving political movements and starting
this
ecological
like for
movements.
A great conspiracy, yeah.
Right, but an accidental one, right? It's just a bunch of people who like want to pull it all together, and like in terms of lower left quadrant, they're like a collective force that coheres together like covertly and is like, this is where the world is moving. You know, we've got major AI, climate change, all these things, and we're gonna just work on it. We're gonna just, everyone's just at the same time, we're working in that direction. Like that's it. That's hopefully what the Integral crew is doing secretly, and I think they are. They're just and some of them are business consultants, and some of them are CEOs, and some of them are, they're just like dotted around the place.
I guess this is sort of the equivalent, you know, of the coffee houses during the Enlightenment,
right?
That played a huge part in it, and like podcasts are the new coffee house, and how people kind of connect and share ideas.
I mean, I completely agree that there needs to be like some intellectual container for the coffee house culture to happen. Podcasts, people's homes, like whatever it is, they just need more of that.
And like a shared language.
I think the idea of an accidental integral conspiracy is fantastic. You trademark it. You need to write a book about it before someone else does.
That's something I find really interesting around integral and conspiracies, because there's a whole small handful of people who love the conspiracy theories, who are in the integral movement. And of course, integral doesn't kick anyone out. It's like, come join us. And so there's like scientists, psychologists, like spiritual, religious, meditators, like all trying to get along with like people who believe in aliens, right? And that's another like something.
Right? I mean, don't get me started on aliens. But that said, I wrote a post about this some time ago, that there is a misunderstanding within the integral community where people are very confused of how diverse is the community, but also sometimes the levels that are expressed are really diverse. You go from incredible magical thinking to hyper sort of orange rationality to very green postmodern, to all of these things. And the thing is that integral is both a map and a level. And the people who are attracted to the map are not necessarily at the level.
Yep.
So you have a bunch of people from all different levels talking about this thing, but it doesn't really mean inherently that there is sort of a greater capacity within this community to already enact the capability of that level.
I mean, I also want to add that integral is the most welcoming community I've ever been in. That like of all of really, absolutely, because maybe I should contextualize. The first bump into integral, I like found the theory on the internet, did some reading, and then like immediately went to my local group. And I was in a room with like 4 to 10 integralists and myself hanging out and having a discussion on some topic. And they were just like open. Like I would say, you know, I was hyper rational at that moment, and I would like explain it like this or say these things, and they'd be like, yeah, tell us more. And then they'd say something weird. I'd be like, all right, I guess. And then I'd say something like, you know, lock it down, do some scientific something or other. And they'd be like, yeah, tell us more. And like, they just kept doing that. And to them, I'm sure I was just an interesting character. And then sure enough, after a couple of weeks, integral like clicked for me, and like it like blew open my capacity to pay attention and understand it from different perspectives. But up until that point, they were just like, yeah, tell us more. And like consistently, every time I've gone back to my local community, which is about once a month, once every couple of weeks, they're still open, they're still curious, they're still, you know, they've got their own stuff, their own limits, but like they want to know and they want to participate and they want to be welcoming to whoever shows up. And I mean, online spaces are a bit complicated because you do get all sorts of people, but they're still welcoming. They're still, I see more of the welcoming culture than I do of the like, you're wrong culture.
Oh, great.
Like,
I'm glad that was your experience. I think
I mean, your experience was like
nice guy.
Holotropic breathwork first, right? That was like, well,
I think that I guess if you meet integral in the world, you tend to meet the level. If you go to just Facebook groups, you meet people discussing the map, and I think that's where you get more feuds going on within this group. So I think that's probably the difference. if you meet people who are at integral, they're great because they tend to be able to talk to different levels and sort of get the wisdom of each of those levels, each with their own little allergies, but still better than people before. I think just we need to coalesce enough critical mass to be able to do that together. I mean, imagine how politics could be different if we had that type of consciousness of trying to listen and understand and really read through the lines and extract value and build value together. I think that's definitely, it's the potential that we're all waiting for integral to bring.
Yeah, I mean, the way I talk about this is imagine like a 5-year-old. A 5-year-old isn't wrong for being a 5-year-old, nor is the 10-year-old more right for being 10 instead of 5.
Yeah.
Nor is the 15-year-old better for being 15 than they are 5. There's just, we exist in the world with people at different mature ages. Some are 20, 30, 40, 50, even though their biological age is whatever it is. They're not wrong or right for being at different ages. They're like, okay, how do I relate to people at different places or in different ways of thinking, in different levels of being?
I think there's an interesting point there also about the difference between spiral dynamics and integral, in the sense that spiral dynamics is often accused to be a little bit colonial, in that it sort of places hierarchies, above others. So you would say a modernist rationalist is inherently superior than all that came before. And I think with the concept of lines, integral rescues that, because integral says you don't just develop vertically, but then you develop the qualities of each of those lines more or less. So I don't know, have you ever watched Parks and Recreations, the TV show?
I know it, yeah.
There's this character, Ron Swanson, which is like a grumpy, angry libertarian, right? Which is a really annoying qualities, but he also has a lot of depth and integrity to himself, and he has all the positive qualities of those levels that are often lost above. And so I think integral is also a little bit able to rescue these developmental models from potentially colonial or needlessly hierarchical interpretations, and it gives value to each stage.
I mean, you stumbled on this, like, I love systems. I started like reading, let me go back to like How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? A classic book, right? And I was like, oh, I'm saved. I finally have the model that will teach me how to interact with people. And then I read Getting Things Done, and I was like, I'm saved. I finally have the productivity system. They don't work. They don't work forever. They fall over. But I was still like, I'm saved. You know what you need? You need more Getting Things Done. And then I was like, you know what you need? You need this new type of therapy that I read. And I like picked up my golden hammer, like every new book for like 300 books. And I kept whacking. I love systems. And then there's this thing that systems and NVC, right? I'm gonna like whack things with my NVC hammer and like, and then there's this problem that I'm actually, NVC is designed for kindness, and I'm like hitting things with the hammer of kindness, being all like, I'm like, I'm not being kind if I'm hitting it with a hammer. There's a way in which I've taken systems and I've used them to knock over the heads of, like, this is the problem with developmental line systems, right? The Western psychology went like, we're better than people because we could make the IQ test. Look at these savage villages. We used to call them savages. These native cultures that can't answer IQ tests. Therefore, they're inferior in some way because they failed at the test that we made and we passed better than they did. Like, oh no, I've used my system to like bonk the head of other people. And I'm hoping, like, in theory, integral is like, wait, be really careful and don't do that. But in practice, sometimes it still does that.
It's very easy to do that. It's like sometimes we joke that it's like giving a nuclear weapon to a child, integral, because it can really help doing these types of things. But I think that there's also a very good conversation within the integral community on how to avoid those pitfalls.
The systematic power of like, I have the system, I made the system, you have to fit into the system that I made.
So no, it's fun. I understand totally the anxiety of finding just like a frame to make sense of reality. It's just like, I think it's the defining emotional fatigue that gives rise to integral most often.
I mean, even the idea of frame sits right up there with roles and phases and lines and levels and like, oh, holy crap, there's a thing called a frame. Like,
See,
And now we can talk about this is a way of looking and this is a perspective. Or that's powerful enough to belong up there. Although I guess they have perspective. So
come again?
They have perspective as the same thing as frame.
Yeah, I mean, no, but I mean, frame I meant also just the entire theory, just the idea that you have like, you know, a lens by which you can interpret different things and use simple ideas to really uncover a lot of complexity. I think that's just, it's helpful. It's a little bit like if you've ever written software, it's like turning from having a very long software that does few things and rewriting it in like a very few lines of code that do all the same things that the previous code did, but just much more efficiently. I think this is the magic of integral or spiral dynamics, is that it just, it allows to do with low computation a lot of results. And and it just makes life easier. And it's also, it reduces the headache, like especially in this time of culture wars, makes it a little bit easier to just have compassion for what's going on. And also in meditation, that's one of the things we were touching on. Like in Buddhism, compassion is, at least in Tibetan Buddhism, compassion is really the core focus of meditation. And I think integral is a powerful tool for compassion because it gives you so many more tools to understand why the hell would people do such weird things and behave in such ways and not understand each other and stuff like that. So it helps love the world a little bit more.
Yeah, I find it so useful for relating to people. Like I can, like people will say things or they'll express themselves in ways that seem very dangerous and very like knee-jerk. I have like a knee-jerk reaction to stay away from that. And then when I start to see it as like, oh, this person's like on a red, like this person's looking at it from very tribally, and they're just like I can reframe it as, and they're looking out for their friends and family and the culture they grew up in, and they're just trying to protect that. And then, you know, when they step into the like public square, or when they step into like the shared space, you know, it can come across as like aggressive or racist or whatever.
I feel like I want to say, like, people are always telling you their cosmic address. Like they're saying, this is where I am, this is where I'm coming from. There's like some context that they are giving when they're like, those people of them other colored skins, they're bad. Like, you know, they're naming, they're like speaking to a part of themselves that they're just probably sometimes hurting or.
Yeah, it's like they're encoding in a very small information that seems to be saying something else entirely. In that little information, like you're saying, oh, I don't like those people, there is encoded a lifetime of value structures and needs and concerns. And so it's like you have a surface level that is often hideous, but then underneath that, you have also a lot of things you can actually build common ground on top. And it's like there's so much density in the information that people convey. I have this theory, you know, they say that like computers are better than us at input and output, right? Like a computer can have a lot of information in and a lot of information out. And I think, well, is that the case? Because of what you said. When you're telling me a very small sentence, you're actually collapsing into that entire sentence. All of that you are in that moment is expressing itself. And you could sort of reverse engineer so much of who that person is from that one little action. And so that's why we're shit at input and output, because in very small action, everything is encoded. So you're actually communicating the entirety of yourself. And that's computationally a huge activity, and computers are not able to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like that's like, I guess like I'm seeing that's how you're relating to the integral is like, okay, this person's putting in some input, or they're putting in some output that I'm going to receive as an input. But like how, like, what does this mean? How does this make sense? And I think this is like a very human struggle, and a lot of our conflicts historically and presently, like even the Ukraine Russian is a lot of that is probably like we're just not understanding each other. Like I think of this with Putin a lot, where it's he says things and then people interpret that, like there's so many interpretations of what does that mean, and like how do we react to that, and then like you were showing us before that you're starting to map these conflicts and what people are saying and like what do they mean by it. So like, oh, they mean on this certain levels, they mean and that's how it should be interpreted, and if you're interpreting it on a different level, then you're missing the point. Like you're not hearing them.
See. Yeah, it's and you can see how I mean, what we're seeing, like right now, we literally have a conflict, like a physical, like an actual war, and we do have all these different. I don't know whether it makes sense to just visually show a second.
Yeah, sure.
Just to give a sense of, this is a sense of how you can practically apply these maps, where you can take the different sort of value structures from spiral dynamics, like magical, egocentric, traditional, rational, pluralistic, integral, and so on. And you can see how each of them, this is a map of how each of them has a, for example, pro-Ukrainian side, pro-Ukrainian side, a pro-Ukrainian neutrality side, and a pro-Russian side, with the same moral and emotional structures. So green will always protect the most vulnerable people. But obviously, depending on your political leaning, you will have a different sense of who are the most marginalized people that are being oppressed, or depending on whose information you actually trust. So is it the Ukrainians who are oppressed, which is what I personally believe, or is it the ethnic Russians that are being oppressed? And therefore, that justifies the whole thing. Or is it the Russians themselves that are at threat, that have to defend themselves? But the moral lens with which I get to it is a lens of care and protection. But it can also be like, screw you, you're getting into my territory, I'm gonna hit you back, which is a pure sort of warlike mentality of like, this is my territory, I'm stronger than you, and because I'm stronger, I have every right to do that. And even that, you find that on all sides. Americans were like, let's bomb the crap out of these guys, and Russians were like, let's bomb the crap out of these guys.
Yeah.
Or
I think like on that level, like, I'm seeing it as the right to self-determination. So like each country or each people have the right to self-determination, and like I'm seeing that value being used on both sides, where the Ukrainians are like, well, we're not going to give up our country just because Russia invaded, and then Russia being, like with NATO and strategic and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I tried to build it. Basically, I built this doing interviews within the integral community and outside, and it helps in terms of sort of working out who everybody's thinking. And what another thing I did is basically I tried to express that same thing as an algorithm. So here's an algorithm of the logical and moral choices that you make to come to a final point of view. So like, is the US an imperialist nation? Yes, no. Probably yes. Does the fact that the US is an imperialist nation justify Russia from being an imperialist? Some people actually think, yes, they did it, we get to do it. And then it's a very simple straight line to, yeah, Russia should invade. And so this is something that helps. And then you basically go through, and the different logic gates lead you to these different points of views, essentially. And I think basically, if you track each of these, then you land on one of these different pieces on the map. And so I've structured it by the morality of the invasion, the actual feasibility of a Ukrainian defense, and then the negotiation options. And this is just a good way to understand your own thinking about a certain subject. So within all of these options, I land in a specific place. But doing this, I was still at least able to understand how other people could get to other conclusions. Haven't been able to persuade anybody with this, but at least I get why they think what they think.
I'm kind of excited by this flow this flow chart about the possibility of like, well, maybe we can change the way we ask this question and get people to decide what we agree with. Like if I even the first question of like is the US an imperialist nation? Well, what if I ask the question like, should the US have the right to have freedom over whether it goes to war or not on its own terms? Like, yeah, everyone's got to say yes to that. Like,
yeah,
immediately.
Well, for example, the next one of the ones that I wrote is like, preemptive invasions are legitimate if a country is under threat.
Oh, that's,
so people
I mean,
could say
huge,
yes,
right?
because like, you know, because like the United States have done that. So if the United States have done that, then it's correct. And my point of view is that it wasn't correct when the United States did it, and it's not correct now.
Right. And someone might be sitting in the position like war is never an option, right?
Exactly.
And much as that may not be like an integrated, healthy position, like for the global, like humans are brutalist. Like we're pretty, we have been murdering each other for thousands of years. So like there's a little bit of a delusion in like war is never an option, but also there's a really nice ideal in like war is never an option, we shouldn't go to war.
Yeah,
where it's like war is never an option, that's why we should attack first, because we need to stop the war from happening.
Well, one of the questions here is like the suffering of the Ukrainian people, if they lose or surrender, will be much greater than if they try to win, which is a little bit that argument. Is like, is it worth to risk human lives? And some pacifists would say it's never worth fighting. It's never worth to do. Even submitting to an invader is better than making a war against them. And so hopefully most of the questions that you would raise, we can sort of either find or add to this type of map. And then basically, but the thing is that most people, when they think, they don't run all the logic gates. Right. And so what you actually have is that if you do run all the logic gates, at some points you get into loops of logical inconsistencies. So this is where I get very orange and rationalist. And my attempt was to create something that people could go through to check their thinking and possibly find points of just like where it's logical. Like people say Ukrainians should surrender. Okay, if Ukraine surrenders, they lose and Russia takes the entire of Ukraine. It's like, no, people say we should negotiate, therefore Ukraine should surrender and stop fighting. And it's like, if they don't fight, it's not a negotiation, it's a surrender. It's a pure illogical thing. So, but hopefully these are things that can help. Like I think in a political party should have this type of reasoning and make that somehow open source so that people can clearly understand what is it that is driving their action and motivation.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool. Cause like I do like, it, like you like the chart itself, I think is very orange. And so like, there's going to be a lot of people that are just going to reject it just because they look at it and they're like, no, you're using your head, you got to use your heart, right? Like it's, and then they're going to say a thing that pulls them in, and then you know, like, okay, like this is
the like cosmic address that they're delivering to you.
Yeah. It's so, and then you're gonna have probably some people look at your chart and be like, dude, like you've oversimplified it, like this is how it is. And they're like, you know, then they're, you know, whatever higher level. But there's like it's so important to not, and this is like a general thing that I found out, is it's so important to not engage logically if someone's engaged emotionally. Like if somebody's emotionally activated, like you need to like emotion them, and like once those emotions are calmed down, or they're put into place, or they're acknowledged, or you know, however it is that you're dealing with it, then to be able to move on to that logical level and be like, okay, like let's actually figure out what's going on here. You know, like let's, you know, both in reality and both in the conversation and in the way we're thinking about like how we're mapping it itself.
I mean, I see this as start where people are. Absolutely. Like, and I want to add to this. If you look at the level systems, right, and you take someone who is, I don't know, at a particular level and you put them under pressure, they will usually drop back to the, I would call it the prior safe level. And they'll like revert, like someone who is like, we must stick to the law and be a good person at all times. If you start pushing them under pressure, they might start punching you, right? They might drop back to like egocentric, like, well, might makes right. And then they're like, I only had to do that because I was justified later when they explain it, right? If you, so people under pressure tend to drop down a level. And if you give people enough space, so like you accept them where they are, you're like, oh, tell me more about your emotional argument. They actually start rising up a level and they start becoming more mature and talking in more complex terms. Like that's a pattern that I've seen through level systems all the time that I see them. And so if you can accept people as they are, where they are, they start growing up like that, like instantly, and hopefully more permanently over time, that they feel validated and accepted, and they get to experience the world through a more complex worldview with you.
Which speaks to the idea that somehow maybe ultimately the main need that is under any expression is the need to be accepted as we are. Like once, like if you acknowledge that, that's already 90% of the conflict is sort of getting resolved on its own. Even if you don't accept what they're saying, what they want, but you just accept that they are how they are, that's already, I think, what most of us need. And all these things that they're seeing is really probably not something that is useful when I'm talking to others, but it's me, this crazy map, is me leaning on my orange muscle to develop my integralness inside. So it's like I have my orange crutch that I put at service of my integral thinking, and it's more of a personal tool. So probably all of these maps that I'm showing are not really an example of what we need to use outside, but of what different people with different personalities can use to self-reflect integrally. But then I think what you're saying is absolutely right. Like when you're talking to people, then they drive the level, they drive the form of the conversation, whereas you may drive the content in a sense.
I experienced this in my city. We had some, this is pre-pandemic, so more than 2 years ago, we had some street vegans, and street vegans are the like militant street vegans. They stand there and they're like, you have to be vegan, right? And I had a good fun time walking up to them and saying hello, and they're like, they don't even let you get a word in. They're like, you have to be vegan because it's right for the animals. And then as soon as they finish that argument, they're like, you should be vegan because it's more economically viable. And then as soon as they finish that, they're like, you should be vegan because it's healthy to be vegan. And then as soon as they finish that, they switch to like, you should be vegan because it's clearly the right thing to do, and you're one of us, right? And then eventually they're like, why do you want to be vegan? Like what appeals to you? And then like I've just gone through like a stack of like cosmic address personal trauma, right? Bang, 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 bang. Like they're broke, they think they're being treated unfairly, and they think that like society's not letting people be healthy. Like amazing. I'm like, I know exactly all about you right now because of this like rant that you gave me. And then we get into the dialogue, right? The actual conversation of like, is vegan right for me? Is like, are you sure you want to be vegan? Like, what if you had a tribe that accepted you and welcomed you even though they weren't vegan? Like, is that okay if you're vegan and they're not? Like, there's really interesting conversations there.
There's also so much pain and trauma that expresses itself through opinions about stuff. Like often your opinion about a given subject, it's how we are enacting a certain pain or a certain need for identity or a certain need for care. And there's also a point of like, the issue of just accepting you as you are is not just I accept your opinion, but I accept you with whatever is in there that is driving that thing. And that's terribly hard because we're all dealing with our own shit that we accept before we have to even accept that of the other ones. But it's truly important. I don't think I'm great at that yet. I'm greater at just like mapping things on my own and just thinking.
You're developing your orange level before you're going to move on.
No, I think I'm using my orange level to consolidate my integral level. I think that's just like, it's the lens that helps me to it's my crutch essentially. So it's the line that I've developed a lot that helps me sort of structure the rest.
Mm. I mean, I feel like this limit, like I start to notice other people suffering. They're like hijacking the conversation and ranting at me, and I'm like, oh, this hurts a lot for you. Like I can't even fathom how much it hurts for you, and that's why it's hard for me to stay in this conversation and entertain you. Like, oh, this is my limit of like how much suffering can I be present to. It's remarkable.
Yeah, I think one of the realizations that I had on ayahuasca was this sense of like how like so many of the emotions that we feel are not our own. I just like at some point I felt, I don't know, it was like some anger or some frustration or something like that. And I just observed it and I was like, wait, whose emotion is this? And then I could actually remember that I had been next to people that felt that emotion a lot. And I just kind of, because we empathically feel each other's emotion, they don't teach us as children that when you feel the emotion of the other person, it's not your emotion. You're just feeling their emotion. And I think that's part of what makes it all this so confusing. And it speaks to the thing that we were saying before of the quadrants of like understanding the boundary between you and the world, or even if there is one. And
I mean, I want to even say it's worse than that. I want to say it's worse than that. It's like, so there's two adults arguing near a baby, right? And the baby's like, doesn't have any boundary, doesn't know what's outside the body, inside the body. And the baby just like feels the emotional flavor of the air that the adults are arguing and just bursts into tears, starts crying. And then the adults stop arguing and deal with the baby, right? And the baby learns, oh, I had a thing and then I started crying and then the thing went away. Like I've just upregulated, feeling other people's emotions, responding to them, like bursting into tears, and then being like consoled by them, right? So it's not even on purpose. It's like we just teach each other this skill of like absorbing other people's stuff, which babies don't know what's inside and outside, and then like treating it as ours and responding to it. Like it's tragic. This is the way that culture happens.
Well, it's like if you look at the integral map that we saw before. It's like every point of the other map is programming every other point of the other map.
Like it's an interrelated dynamic thing that's holding itself.
It's an interrelated programming software. Everything is programming everything else because everything is teaching everything else through a series of allergy, addiction, pleasant reaction, negative reaction. And so there isn't a single thing that is coding any other single thing. You cannot find like a beginning. It's just it's like an infinite machine of machines that program machines that program each other that program each other. It's like what Tibetan Buddhists call like dependent origination. It's like everything is causing everything.
Well, I mean, possibly way back in time, atoms bashed into each other, and now we're arguing on the internet on a podcast about right? And like. For me in this moment, it doesn't matter that the atoms bashed into each other back then. We're still like in conversation, in dialogue here right now with like non-originated experience, right? It's just happening. Or causally everything is related and it's like,
Carl Sagan used to say that to make a cake, first you need to make a universe.
Yes. First invent the universe.
Yeah. And to me, integral, getting back to the thing, is just really this, I think you've added this historical element, like the concept of non-duality. You're not just causally one with all that is around you in the here and now, but you're causally one with all that came before and that will come after. There is no, the lack of boundary is in any direction, so through space and time, and it's just like it's insane. It's like take some mushrooms and think about that. It just will explode your head,
I have an interesting question for you. So we talked earlier about the observer, right? Observer sort of state, observer of reality. And then we're talking now about how there's no boundary, everything's kind of connected. There's no such thing as like sort of observing without being part of the world, right? Because we're part of the world. I can't just watch a conversation without being a person myself sitting in the conversation, not saying anything. There's something where observer seems to affect reality. And yet my question is like, is that observer in our head, the belief that there is a neutral observer, is that really screwing us up and like throwing us all over the place? Because there isn't such a thing. And yet we have this like witness thing that's in our head that keeps throwing intellectual confusion into the battle, that it is possible to run science from an objective perspective, whereas maybe it is for chemistry, but not for like psychology.
My God, this is a huge question.
Yeah,
but it's a really good question. No. But I mean, so I think that, I'll try to recap your question to see if I understood correctly. You're saying is, on one hand, we speak of observer in spirituality because it's a useful tool. It's a grand realization at time. It has its thing. But on the other hand, we speak of non-duality, and inevitably, if you push the non-duality argument far enough, you can no longer even separate the observer from the observed. So the question is the observer a useful fiction or something that is throwing us, it's like the wrong scent that is throwing us off the direction? Right. And I think that it's both, in the sense that like we were saying, like allergy and addiction, or like separation and wholeness, in any spiritual practice, you tend to have these two moments. You have a moment where you're sort of, how do you say, separating further, whether you're sort of going up, but then that moment comes with another moment that goes down. And this has, you remember the states of consciousness that we described. There was the physical, subtle, the states are physical, the bodies are physical, subtle, causal, non-dual, and the states of consciousness are sort of this waking, dreamful sleep, dreamless sleep. Now, the dreamless sleep, or the causal, the pure emptiness, is an important threshold in meditative experience, but it's considered to be a very partial result. There is these two types of, I hope I'm not misusing the terms, but there's this concept of savikalpa samadhi and nirvikalpa samadhi. One is the enlightenment where you just realize everything is gone. There is nothing. There's pure void, which is somehow speaking to the primacy of the observer, because at that point, you're just the observer without any content. But then in Buddhist tradition, they understood that state is itself a dualistic state, and there has to be something that comes afterwards. And what comes afterwards is this realization that there is no separation between emptiness and form, and this insane paradoxal state in which somehow you're able to appreciate both simultaneously. So my sense is that the observer is a very useful meditative tool that you can use for a while, but that ultimately you need to drop also that one, essentially. And the thing that you said is a precious reminder that, like, whenever you're teaching meditation, you're speaking to transcendental things. So the minute you're using language, you're fucking it up. You're adding complexity that shouldn't be there. So these types of reminders are very useful, and they're a reminder of why in some esoteric tradition, they speak as least as possible. And we think that Zen. Like in Zen, yeah, we think that they don't speak because they don't want to reveal their secrets. With a stick. They don't speak because they don't want to get ideas in front of you. And I think that one of the problems that I had was that I tended to project a Catholic Protestant understanding of enlightenment onto my spiritual practice. So enlightenment, it's the ultimate sacrifice. It's you just punishing yourself and eliminating all that you are so that you can finally do all the things that you have to do for the world. Well, that's not what Buddhist enlightenment is. But if you come from a Protestant background, you will easily project this moral structure on it. So I think that your comment is true, speaking specifically about the observer, but it's even more true in general about the use of any language when you're describing meditative practice. Any language by default is is an imperfect tool for teaching that. So remembering that it is useful. And but I think, yeah, there is a process of detachment of going up, and then a process of just like going back down and again being one with everything.
And what level is that?
That's okay. No, that's a good question. Spiral dynamics does not very well. The big conflict in spiral dynamics and integral is that spiral dynamics doesn't quite integrate well mystical states into its thing. And Ken Wilber is, on the other hand, criticized for giving too much emphasis to them. If you sort of look at yellow, like sort of the stage that we're talking about is like understanding levels, understanding system, understanding maps is one level. Then you have turquoise, which is basically the level where that understanding is starting to be translated also in empathy and a little bit of self-transcendence. Like it's just, it's a lot more embodied, there's a lot more kind. And the last level, or the levels above, are where an integral mind is fully integrated with a non-dual consciousness. So you are able to understand these non-dual things, but you're also able to think like an integral person within all this. So you have sort of like, you're able to maintain these top states of consciousness, while at the same time you've developed as much as you can these stages of consciousness. And you can also have just states without the stage, but if you have both, then you are at these like at the top stages that we've understood until now. Probably aliens have better stages than us.
Little plug for the aliens there. Well, maybe we will. Go ahead, then.
No, I want to ask about the aliens at some point, but is this like a lizard people aliens or like
No,
little gray man alien?
No, I'm not the lizard people alien type thing. But I am personally intrigued by all these new like UAP sites, like of these like things that are moving in the air. I don't know if you I mean that's intriguing.
That doesn't fit into my models either.
I know. We can have a discussion around that, but like it's sufficiently weird that very educated people are running out of ideas. And if there were aliens, that's exactly how they would move, because there's so much distance in the space that the only thing that could move to us is something that bends gravity, because you cannot move with a conventional engine. You can only move across space if you can bend gravity. And these objects are moving in a way that seems like they're not affected by gravity. They go into the water, they go into the air, they move very fast. And it's also like, it's fun, like of all the things to just kind of hope for. And it's like, it's the type of conspiracy that has so little effect. Like it's not the COVID conspiracy. So I think it's like, everyone should be entitled to a vice and a little conspiracy. Just like a harm, like you shouldn't like drink yourself to death and just like throw your life away, but you can drink a little bit of whiskey. You should be allowed to have like, watch a couple
crazy theories
and not like stop voting people because you think they're reptilians. I think that's the healthy boundary of
I mean, just say on conspiracy theories, like I think like people are like conspiracy theories are false, like that's wrong, right? Like historically there have been lots of conspiracies. Most of them are false, but some of them are probably right. And
I mean,
I think
I have a list, right? What are my like true conspiracy theories? Okay, so the government is not out for my best interests, right?
Well,
like, wait a second, that's real, that's true.
Check.
Like, advertising conspires to use human conditions against us. They throw sex and stuff at us in order to, okay, that's not even a conspiracy. Like, there's weird ingredients going into products and we don't really know what they are on the consumer level, and it's like something's getting away from us. Bureaucracy is designed to prevent people from getting wealthier and getting out of the rat race. Like, oh no, like I'm one of the conspiracy theorists and these are just normal conspiracies that no, politics is bullshit and like we waste our time voting for people and then they don't do what we want. Like, the world is screwed up in these ways. Like, governments start bullshit wars with each other just to like justify their war spending. Like, oh, okay, like I'm a conspiracy theorist. There's an algorithm that feeds me information that like
that coats your brain.
That like is like media. Trying to funnel me in certain directions of beliefs. Like, oh no, I'm a conspiracy theorist. Like,
yeah,
like these aren't even interesting conspiracies. Like, where are the aliens?
That's right? The thing. They're boring. The reason why we like conspiracy theories is because we like novelty.
Right.
And the real conspiracies are boring. Like the actual conspiracies that are screwing up our life, they're not entertaining enough to actually capture the attention of so many people. And but come on, allow yourself at least some weird ones. You know.
The moon. There's no moon. The moon doesn't actually exist.
Hollow moon. Yeah.
Hollow moon.
I mean, I've made friends with the flat earther community, and I've done a bunch of interviews with a flat earther friend, and it's just fascinating how just like if you establish a few assumptions, then it completely makes sense. Like if you just posit 2-3 things, it's like a good science fiction movie is a movie where you have 3 absurd assumptions, but the rest is very realistic based on those assumptions. And that's, you know, unfortunately, a lot of conspiracy theories are like that. Once you check something, then it makes sense. But I don't believe Earth is flat.
I'm thinking of like Flubber, you know, like he's got this weird rubbery thing. He made a flying car and like it's sentient and like is like a character too. Like, oh, and then we got a whole movie.
Yeah, I'm liking that you are looking at these things like very orangely. Like you're saying like it's like all like it's internally consistent. You know, instead of like reverting to the tribal, which I think a lot of people do, which is like trust the science and flat earth is wrong and evil. And like I know for me, like I had to check it out at some point because I'm like, is the earth flat? Like it's pretty much flat, right? Like the water, like it's water level. Like I use a leveler to determine if things are flat. And like the ocean.
I feel like I want to say it's locally flat. Like, near me, it seems pretty, unless there's like mountains and stuff, but like locally, it's quite flat. And then obviously on a larger scale, the Earth's a pretty big object.
Yeah, and I feel like if you want to actually know is the Earth flat or not, is like you got to learn there's a lot of stuff you have to learn. Like you have to learn how to think, you have to, you know, learn, depending on which proof you're using, you might have to know like trigonometry or how to,
you might have to walk up a mountain. Like who wants to do that? Or, I'm so lazy.
Yeah, or like learn like the empirical side of things. You know, like I think for people our age, it's like a given that we know this, but like we didn't at some point. Like I have a 1-year-old and he doesn't know this. He doesn't know the world is round, right? Like he doesn't have any of these concepts and he doesn't have the ability to sort of like learn the science yet or learn how things work.
I think the problem is also that I think the challenges that we're seeing right now is, first of all, if I had to explain and prove the Earth is flat, I wouldn't be able to. Like right now, if you ask me right now, like off the spot, I would need to kind of sit for a moment, think, wait, what did they teach us in high school? What was some proof, some empirical? Like,
I mean, I could go look up a book or something, or like
I would need to look it up. Like, it's not like I would need to be able. So in a debate with a flat earther,
their assumptions aren't wrong.
well, the thing is that there are different levels of flat earther. Some of their theories are interesting and complex enough that I'm not able to immediately, like that I don't have enough, like I know that I'm right, but I cannot argue that. And I think that's a lot of the problem that we have with today is like, how much should I know for myself? Or how much should I trust that is true? Because on one hand, you don't want to just join the bandwagon and believe things. But on the other hand, I can't explain how everything works because it's just the world is so complex. But some of the explanations that they have are fantastic. Well, I can, but it's like I can always learn more, but the requirements of society are such that I will always, in the meantime, have to engage with things that I need to just trust that they work. Like I need to trust that this computer is not going to electrocute me right now. And I just hope it doesn't. I can trust that I can trust that there are systems in place that there is some bureau somewhere of the computer.
Not electrocute me bureau.
Like,
that's nice.
But it's just like, I just turn it off and hope. And I'm sure that if I was a computer engineer, I could sort of tell, like the voltage is not going to do anything to you, or there is this thing that does this other thing. And balancing out these two drives, the drive for efficacy and the drive for self understanding, it's key. And I think that the problem is that if you try to understand things, but you don't have the cognitive equipment to do it, you most likely will convince yourself of the wrong things, which is what happens with many conspiracy theories. It's like you need such levels of abstraction sometimes that you will land on the most intuitive ideas and not the most counterintuitive ones.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I like about the spiral dynamics levels is that I can say, like, for a given thing, I'm just going tribal. Like, this is what my group believes, so I'm going to believe it. And you can try to engage with me on an orange level, and I'm like happy to try, but you're not going to convince me because I almost like I don't have permission to change my mind. This group has permission to change my mind about things, and I'm not the one in charge of that. And I think it's really important to be able to differentiate what things I'm in charge of and what things I'm not.
It seems really important to be self-aware about, like, it's okay to rely on my tribe or trust the science as long as I know that I have defaulted to. It's like how I trust a mechanic. Like, I don't want to fucking open my car and fiddle with things. Like, no, I don't have the time or the energy or the place, and I know that I'm gonna put my trust in a mechanic for that one.
And maybe you have a method as to how you establish who you trust.
Right.
Like, has this thing been developed through a scientific method, or is this something that some person dreamed up 2,000 years ago and that we've kept saying? There's a big difference between those two modes.
If there was the qualified mechanic or the guy over there with a hammer, like, who says he's mechanic, I'm like, wait a second, that guy looks like he knows what he's doing or something, or like that guy's got the qualification.
I mean, that's magenta level that you're playing at right there, right? Saying this guy's dressed the part and this guy's not, so I'm going to go with the guy. Right. But I think the orange level would be like, I looked at this guy, I looked at the last 10 things he said, and I checked them all up, and they were all accurate.
And I checked the certificate on the wall that the whole system trained him and qualified him.
Well, that's back to tribal, right?
Is it tribal?
No, I think it's blue. I think it's blue.
Yeah.
Blue.
Because it's rules. It's like tribal is like, I believe what my people believe. Blue is I believe what the rules of my people establish. And if I live in a scientific society, my blue mind will follow scientific rules.
I mean, if I was like, but this is a really friendly mechanic, right? That one's kind of rude, and this guy's really friendly. That's
tribalistic.
Well, it's either tribal or it's green at some point. Like, I trust him because he's being nice to me.
No,
because green should already have the structure of reason as well. Like, I'll make an example. When I was talking to my friend, we were talking about COVID, we were talking about flat Earth, and I was saying, like, okay, we can't figure everything out. And I was asking him, like, what system, yellow question, like, what system could we establish to jointly establish what the truth is? I was asking, like, should we have a bunch of people that we delegate, or should we create an experiment together, or should we? So I was like, what is the system for you? And he said, no, you are the system. Because it's like, I trust you, you're a cool, because he likes me. He's like, you're a cool entrepreneur. You're someone who doesn't have my beliefs, who is being nice to me in engaging on a peer level. I trust that you're an intelligent thinking person, so you are my system. And so that's why, for example, we should have. But it also means that if you want to persuade, first of all, it's a great compliment, but it's also, if you want to persuade people of taking the vaccine, you need to persuade priests. You don't need to. You need to work with community leaders. Like, you need to leverage these one-on-one tribalistic networks of trust, where I don't do this because I trust the system of medical establishment, but I've seen Bob. Bob is a doctor in my community, is a well-respected member. I trust his human qualities. And if he says it, I'll do it. And this is like if we had understood that this was the decision-making model of so many people, we could have enacted so many more strategies that just leveraged this, because that was the only problem, because blue follows the herd. So blue either follows the red ones or the orange ones. And as soon as follows the red ones, orange hates it. And so it radicalizes into red. But when it doesn't, orange praises him. And so he stays around. And so the main problem is that we did not understand red. And why did we not understand it? Because this is my theory, the real conflict in COVID, the real root cause is a conflict between green and orange, between remember the quadrants before, between the subjective sciences and the objective sciences, between social sciences and hard sciences. So the problem is that the scientists used science not just to build the vaccine, but to roll out the vaccines. And they did not believe the fact that there is a slew of research on vaccine hesitancy. There is already manuals on how to do this. This issue has been studied forever.
Right, because we took vaccines into Africa, which people were very ill-informed, right? And we know how to do that.
And they did better. We had the measles outbreak. We had all these different things. And so the big problem here is that hard scientists are still not trusting soft scientists. If they had been able to communicate, then the communication downwards would have been much more efficient. But social scientists are green, and so they're not yet able to talk to orange from a developmental standpoint. They're not yellow yet. And so my theory is that if we had
translate their findings into something like more empirical, more hard science.
If they just did their same experiments using neurobiology, it would have worked. Like if they said, we looked at the brains of people that are resisting vaccines and we're seeing this, and if you do that, it will happen, it will resolve itself. Maybe hard scientists would have listened to them, even if they would be describing the same exact phenomena.
Yeah. I totally get what you're saying. Like there's figuring out what to do, and then there's communicating it. And like when you're figuring it out, you want to find the level you want to find the right level for the problem. But then when you're communicating it, you often want to translate it into the level that the other person's at.
Yeah.
I mean, in this country, the government set a vaccine mandate. So anyone working in healthcare or education, or I think also for the government, even if they weren't people facing, was mandated to get vaccinated, which definitely hurt a lot of people's feelings when they were told what to do. Like many of these were medical professionals who would have probably gotten vaccinated anyway, because they know the science and they trust the body of wisdom. But many of them were just like, don't tell me what to do. I do that too, right? You tell me what to do and I'm like, no, don't tell me what to do. I'll do it I feel like it, or if I feel like it's right. But as soon as I'm like forced to do it, and then the people obviously either had to choose to get vaccinated or lose their jobs. And then I know of a handful of people who then got vaccinated and then got an adverse reaction, and then were quite upset about the adverse reaction because they were kind of forced into being on the receiving end of an adverse reaction that they otherwise couldn't. Like maybe they could have controlled if they were took some time off work or like all these other things, but because they were forced into it, it like added stress to stress. And like this is just tragic. We live in a world where we like beat other people over the head with our beliefs in order to get things to happen.
And it triggered the red inside of us.
Right, absolutely. When I say I'm angry, I'm red.
Yeah, and that's why you have, scientists at Orange whose red emotional reaction led them to have to scientifically rationalize their aversion to this objection of freedom. But and so it's a lot more could have been done if social scientists and hard scientists had talked to each other. And that's definitely one of the big challenges that integralists should try and mediate. I think that
I want to say like we're in a hurry to get this to happen, because like this is one of the urgent problems of our time is to get this communication to happen.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that was like a huge, like I think that was a huge problem with the COVID, was that it was very panicky. Like it came from a very panicky place, and it wasn't, and especially like because like everything got shut down. So like communication, like everyone's switching to online, it made it very difficult to have conversations and to connect with people. And
Well, I
so,
mean, I do see the other side of like cases were doubling each day. You only get like 20 or 30 doublings in a thing before 100% of the population has it. So there's a necessity to act
the
quickly.
first time, first time, but like we're on outbreak like 5 or 6 or something.
Yeah.
I don't know where we're at. I'm not sure.
But then, like, I can understand why the panic is coming in. Right? There's this quality of panic that is at least semi-informed by reality. They're not just panicking because they feel they enjoy panicking. They're panicking. In fact, in this country, the government, like the government acted way too slow. Like if they had shut us down, I mean, for the last lockdown that they did, if they had shut us down, like I could see it. I was sitting here on my computer watching the daily numbers going like, shut us down already. And then like a month later,
like
they shut us down and we had this like huge way, and like, you know, it was the stupidest thing ever. Like, but the like, if they had listened to the panic early, like that.
No, but I think that the panic was also due, like we panic when we don't know what to do. And there was 2 aspects of not knowing what to do. There was a scientific aspect, and then there was a rollout aspect of like how to tell people that we have to lock down. That part we should have already known, because I mean, there have been outbreaks of things. There is literature on that. So you may not know whether you want to lock down or not. But when you do lock down, you should already have a clear plan as to how you communicate that, how you enact that.
And I mean, like the frustrating thing is like Taiwan had a clear plan. Like, had a clear plan. So Taiwan's vice president was an epidemiologist, and like day 2 of the pandemic, they like had a 97-step plan for, like they just knew. Like, and the rest of us countries here in the world are like, what do we do? We've never seen a pandemic. It's not like there was one 100 years ago. What are we gonna do? Like, oh my god. Clearly, I'm still angry about some of this. Like, what?
And also, collectivist societies fared well. Better than individualist society,
because they follow the rules.
So
you set a rule and they follow it.
Yeah, and they follow it partly because they follow it, partly because of an the reason why Red didn't understand the whole thing is that a Red person will always assume that if you're limiting someone else's freedom, you're doing it to be an asshole and to get power, because that's what they would do if they had power. So they project their own value structure, and they cannot assume. It's like a child who doesn't understand that the parent is giving him rules for his own good. And so you're projecting this, and you get paranoid, and you think, wow, those people in power must be assholes. Because I'm exaggerating. I'm not saying that all people at Red are assholes, but I'm just saying that when you see infringement of freedom coming at you at Red, you can only interpret it having a malevolent goal. You cannot interpret it as like, okay, maybe it's for the good of everyone. Whereas a blue society is much more likely to say, okay, this rule is coming, maybe it's for the good of everyone else. Does that make sense? You don't agree, Daniel?
I don't agree with this.
I'm following.
I think okay, so like I guess
we're like showing our colors right now.
No, we're showing our stack. We're showing our stack.
Yeah,
because I think we exist on all these colors, and I think probably we took different sides on this COVID thing. Because like I was like I'm like against the shutdowns, at least in Canada. I don't know about elsewhere, but like so for me, I'm on the other side of this. My red level showing up is like I'm Jewish. My like all the people I went to school with and like their families and like my family's also like they went through the Holocaust. They're like the grandparents, our grandparents' age. And so when I see like governments starting to like lock people in the houses and not let them out and like be inconsistent and like, you know, they're not really like at least the Canadian government wasn't really following rules, and they weren't following science. They were making like these rules that felt very much like they're just trying to take power. Like my immediate panic is like, oh yeah, Jews haven't been killed in the last 100 years. We're about time. Like it's about time for the Jewish genocide to happen again.
I don't. I know. I don't think you're wrong. I think that what I was describing was what would happen in the mind of a person at Red. you're not at red. So your interpretation of malevolence was not the product of your redness in that sense. Or it was not the product of a projection, probably, of redness, or it's also the problem of historical trauma, which can also inform a correct perception of reality. So I'm not saying that you may have been wrong there, but what I was describing before was someone who just is only red, just sees red, and sees red outside. You have probably a much more nuanced perspective on that.
Thank you.
But I think that when it comes to the point of Elliot, is like, to me, it's just like, it only boils down whether you understand the exponential equation. That's it.
For
like
you,
if you understand
this is your reasoning.
happened,
Very orange.
That's the
orange
only,
momentary.
If you wanna understand how to deal with epidemics, you need to explain it at all levels. But like, if you take, I actually created at some point a exponential line simulator, and I would show it to my friends. I'd be like, hey, imagine there is like 3% more people infected every day. How many people do you expect to have in like X days? And the result was always like 10 million more than what they thought. Because people don't, like, it's so
like
the drive of exponential equation is so counterintuitive that when you see it in reality, it's, and so the reason I was in favor of super early lockdowns is because it's just like, if you stop that line, you stop everything. And I understand that there is a lot of negative implications to imposing coercive rules that then stay. So it's not a neutral problem. We shouldn't have gotten there to begin with. But but once you get there, shut that freaking line, because it's just like, look, I'll show you super quickly. I will have to go soon because I have a one-room apartment and my wife wants to sleep. I'll just show you this because it speaks to the how you. this is something that is very orange. So you would need to translate that in a non-orange language. But it's basically like, imagine that you have. This was January 2021 in the United States. Okay. So if you have an increase of 1% over a year, you will have 35,000 infected people.
Yeah.
The day they lockdown increased, it was at 8%, which would produce this after a year.
Right.
Like there's no it just after 6 months is like 1 billion people. And if you account for a 1% mortality rate, after 6 months, that's 11 million people dead. It just and this you can stop by bringing this down. Just that's it. Like that's the only thing you can freaking do. And the problem is that like a minute percentage changes the result exponentially. So like was 35,000, 2% is 1.2 million. And so that's my own reasoning, but I also understand that this is a reasoning that hasn't been explained. I would have expected something like this to play, like a game, and everyone should have been like playing with this to understand, guys, you need to stop this. Because even if the mortality rate is like 0.0 something, we're fucked. So that was my reasoning.
I mean, you raise an interesting.
Make sense. Yeah.
I see this way in which, much as arguments are complex, sometimes they like collapse down to like the one prime fact. Like this factoid will decide whether I think Russia should or shouldn't be in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Like this one factoid will decide whether I think we should shut down in COVID. Like, and even like with me talking to the vegans, this one factoid decides whether they're on the street yelling at me about being vegan or if they are themselves not vegan at all, right? There's often like one fact, and people don't always reveal their one factoid, the thing that their evidence stands on. They don't know because sometimes they don't know. But if you can get in touch with it, that's when transformation can happen.
Like this is literally the thing I'm obsessed with. Understanding that, like you saw that map from before, that's the map of the factoids, and like it's complex, but for some people it's just one or another.
Yes.
Like Palestinian and Israeli, maybe they have people who are pro-Palestine and pro-Israel generally have like two things that are a perspective about the situation that make the rest absolutely implied and obvious and logical. And often we debate without having that thing really clear and without understanding that we shouldn't discuss everything else. We should just be discussing
the one thing that matters to you.
The one thing. And so I think that the best goal of an argument is even just saying, what is, like, let's discuss, let's pick a subject we disagree with, and let's understand the root disagreement from which all arise. And I think like doing that as a life goal is what I would love to do. Like working with people, interviewing people, and mapping this thing.
That this is called in the rationalist community. This is called double cruxing. Like that's
double
cruxing.
So you're finding what is the crux for me and what is the crux for you, and how do we like bring them closer and like have them talk to each other until we like we get to unification agreement on the issue. Yeah.
So guys, I'm sorry, I have to leave because
Psychotechnology.
You can join us. So this is our finish, right? We go Psychotechnologies live.
Psychotechnologies
Live.